Hello everyone, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. My name's ArcRevner and I like to play games. And today we're going to be talking about Ganyu, Constellations 0 through 6, and seeing whether they're worth it or not. Alright guys, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about Ganyu and her constellations and whether they're worth pulling for or not. Just a disclaimer, I do want to say that Ganyu is extremely strong at C0 and you do not need to summon any constellations for her, unless you really want to min-max her and deal as much damage with her as possible. That being said, let's discuss my current Ganyu build and how much damage she's currently dealing. So as you could see, her damage was over 2,300, her crit rate is at 32.6%, her crit damage is at 204.2%, her energy recharge is a little bit low at 110%, and her cryo bonus damage is at 61.6%. I am currently rocking a Amos Bow Refinement 2. I know most people will only have one at Refinement Rank 1, or will be using a Prototype Crescent or Blackcliff Warbow, so if you have those work perfectly fine and don't worry about it too much. I'm currently using the Blizzard Strayer set. I still do think that this is her best set. I think that you could use a Wanderer's Troop set as well, but it's much harder to farm. And the Blizzard Strayer set gives you so much crit rate that you can focus all your attention on crit damage and just dealing a lot of damage in general. So that's what I'm currently sticking with and enjoying the most. As you can see, my constellations are at 0 since we're first starting out, but we will slowly unlock them and talk about each one as we go. And currently all my constellations are starting at level 8, but they will be going up as we unlock constellations, so keep a lookout for that. Alright, and with that, we're just going to get started. I hope that you guys enjoy the video, and if you do, please leave me a like and comment down below. I'd really appreciate it, and please consider subscribing if you want to see more Genshin Impact videos. Alright, let's go ahead and start the damage showcase. So I use Mona and Xingqiu here. I don't use them to do any damage to the Pyroregistrifine, just to bring it down, and then I end up switching to Ganyu so I can actually inflict damage to show the numbers. So first we're going to start with her charge shot, her Frostflake arrow, and see how much damage that does. So you can see that the bloom does about 24,000 damage and the initial shot does around 12,000 damage. That's actually pretty impressive just at C0, it's hitting really hard already. But let's check out the skill. So with a non-crit that's about 3,600. And gotta wait for the skill to come back up. Hopefully it'll crit this time. And as you can see, with the crit it does around 10,000, almost 11,000 damage. Alright, now let's go ahead and check out the burst damage. So we'll pop her ult, and just run away a bit so we can see the numbers. So without a crit it's doing about 1,921 damage, and with crits it's doing 5,844 damage. It's pretty respectable, and as you can see, it's already below half health just using her ult. Okay, but it's great seeing them all individually so we have a base for how much damage we're dealing, but I'm sure you're probably more interested to see it actually take down the Regisfine. So we're going to quickly take down the shield with Mona and Xingqiu, and then we're going to pop the burst, then the skill, and then start dealing Frostflake arrow damage. And as you can see, Ganyu does a lot of damage just at C0. To put things in perspective, it only took her about 11 seconds from when she first entered the field to take down the Pyroregisfine. I think this amount of raw power is enough to make her worth summoning for, and honestly I think that this just at C0 is more than enough to make her a viable character on any team. If you want my honest opinion, I don't think that you need to summon any more for Constellations because she's just so good at C0. As you'll see in the rest of the video, I do think that she definitely does gain a lot from her other constellations and becomes she becomes insane in terms of power. But I think that she's so good at C0 that you don't really need it. However, if you clicked on this video, I'm pretty sure that you're at least curious to see what the constellations do and just how powerful she gets. So let's move on to Constellation 1. Alright, let's go over Constellation 1, Dew Drinker. Taking damage from a charge level 2 Frostflake Arrow or Frostflake Arrow Bloom decreases opponent's cryo res by 15% for 6 seconds. A hit regenerates 2 energy for Ganyu. This effect can only occur once per charge level 2 Frostflake Arrow, regardless if the Frostflake Arrow itself or the bloom hits the target. So this is actually probably Ganyu's best constellation in terms of her being a main damage dealer. So if I'm going to be honest, this is probably the only constellation that I would recommend to low spending players or free to play players if Ganyu is your absolute favorite. This will increase her damage across the board as long as you're hitting them with a Frostflake arrow. Basically, you are getting a universal cryo res debuff, and this affects every aspect of her kit. It'll affect her Frostflake arrow damage, it will affect her skill damage, and it will affect her burst damage. It will only be for 6 seconds, but if you're playing with Ganyu as your main, you're probably going to be repeatedly hitting with Frostflake arrows and repeatedly applying the debuff. But as I just mentioned in the C0 showcase, this isn't necessary, this is just additive. It does make her a lot stronger, but she's already very strong at her base level, so you don't necessarily need this unless if you are a diehard Ganyu fan and just want her to be as strong as possible. Alright, and that's all well and good, but it's usually a lot easier to actually see just how much of a difference that makes when you actually put it to test when you're battling. So here we have Ganyu, and we're going to start using the Frostflake arrows just to see how much damage it's doing. And as you can see, it is a pretty big difference. It is gaining about a 3,000 to 4,000 damage increase because you are constantly applying a cryo debuff to the Pyroregicine. So essentially I'm getting a 6,000 to 8,000 buff to my Frostflake arrows alone. Alright, and now let's check it out with the skill. So we're going to apply the Frostflake arrow, and now without non-crit it's doing about 4,000 damage, and let's see how much it does with crit. About 12,500. So although it's not a huge difference, it will increase your DPS. Alright, now let's check it out on the burst. So we'll pop the burst, and then we're going to use a Frostflake arrow to bring the damage up. And you can see that it's now doing 6,656 damage. But after about 6 seconds it should go back down, so now it's doing about 5,844 damage again, which is exactly how much it was doing before the debuff. Alright, and now let's put it all back together. Now you will see that I did forget to use the skill. However, I did do so much damage that honestly it didn't matter, and it went down with 3 arrow flakes and a burst. Like I said, I do think that this is a really good constellation, but it's really only good if you're using Ganyu as your main damage dealer so that she can keep applying Frostflake arrows. Either that, or if you have another really strong cryo unit that you want to use as a main damage dealer, but I don't really see the point considering how strong Ganyu is. So again, really good, but not necessary. So if you do like Ganyu a whole lot, and she is your main damage dealer, then maybe getting C1 would be worth it to you just because it will increase your overall damage. But if you're free to play, then it might actually be better just to save your resources and pull another 5-star character down the line. Ultimately, it's your choice and you should do what's best for you and your account. Alright, and moving along to Constellation 2, the Auspicious. Basically, this just gives you another charge of your Trail of Quillian, and I really underestimated just how good this is. I was like, okay, well this is great because I will be getting a lot more energy, I will be able to get my burst up a lot easier, and I'll just be doing more damage because now I have 2 of these. However, I didn't really think about just how much more energy I would be getting, and it's actually extremely valuable. So one thing that I failed to notice prior to this is that you actually get energy upon when you hit with her skill, as well as when it explodes. So you actually do get about 4 energy just by using it once, but that doubles all the way up to 8 energy when you have 2 skills to use. This paired with Constellation 1, which automatically gives you back 2 every time that you hit a Frostflake arrow on an enemy, means that you don't really have to build energy recharge on Ganyu anymore, and you can just focus everything into crit damage and attack. So I definitely underestimated just how valuable this was in terms of her overall DPS over long periods of times and battles against multiple enemies, because it just makes it a lot easier to make sure that she's constantly doing her optimal damage output. However, you can get around this by getting good substats for energy recharge on your artifacts, so it's not a deal breaker, and this is just additive more than anything. You don't need this in order for her to be a good DPS, but it does make it a lot easier. Ultimately, this was a constellation that I didn't notice a whole lot of extra DPS necessarily. You do get an extra skill, so you are getting about 30,000 extra damage, but you could just be using a Frostflake arrow damage instead, so I'd have to say that this constellation serves more of a utility purpose than a damage purpose. That is until C6, where it becomes integral to how much damage you can actually output, but that's for later in the video, so stick with me. But for now, let's just move on to C3. Alright, and moving on to Constellation 3, we have Cloud Strider. This is pretty simple. All it does is it increases the celestial shower damage or burst damage by 3. So unlike any of the other constellations which gives you a whole new effect, this basically just makes your talent level for your burst go up by a total of 3 levels. This is really good because it does increase your damage by a lot, but it's not going to give you any additional effects. So think of this more as a raw damage boost to your burst damage rather than anything game-changing because it won't give you any additional effects. However, this paired with the very next constellation, C4, actually does make a huge difference, but we'll get into that in just a second. Alright, but let's actually see it in action real quick. So we're going to pop the burst, and we're going to run outside the circle so we don't get hit when it comes back up, and as you can see, we're now doing about 6,940 damage. And that's actually a pretty significant boost when you think about it, because that's per icicle. So although it may not seem like it's a big boost to your DPS, it actually is because over a longer term of time, you're going to see a lot more damage done to the enemies trapped within it. But ultimately, this constellation just by itself is not worth it, because you can already get pretty high damage just by leveling it up normally with C0. The extra damage is always nice, but rolling for this would not be worth it. This is only worth it when you have it in conjunction with C4. So if you're already at C2 and you're thinking about getting C3, you actually need to be thinking about if you want to get C4, and that's much more of a commitment. So overall, I would completely skip 3 and stick with 2 unless if you're planning on getting more constellations. Alright, and that brings us to Constellation 4, which is honestly one of the best constellations that I've ever seen on a character, because it not only increases the damage that she does, but her entire party does for a set amount of time. Westward Sojourn makes it so that opponents standing within the field of her burst takes increased damage. This effect strengthens over time, and increased damage taken begins at 5% and increases by 5% every 3 seconds up to a maximum of 25%. And the effect lingers for 3 seconds after the opponent leaves the AoE field. To be completely honest, I do think that this is quite honestly one of the single best passive abilities in the game, because it not only affects Ganyu's damage, but you can also take advantage of this with any character and set up for some pretty dangerous melt comps and elemental reactions. However, since it's so high up on her constellation list, that's what makes it so tricky. If this was a C1 or C2, I would say go for it, but since it's C4, that's a lot of investment into one character, and it may not be worth it instead of getting other 5-star characters down the line. So this one is really great. I do think that it is one of the best passives in the game, but it may not be worth it if you have to go all the way to C4 to get it. Alright, but let's see it in action. So we're going to pop the burst and step away. So we're starting out with about 7,100 damage, that's up to 7,300 damage, 7,500 damage, 7,799 damage, and it probably would have went up a little bit more if the flower didn't die so quickly. The damage scaling within the burst actually gets pretty insane, and when you start adding things like the Frostflake Arrow or another teammate's damage into it, you're going to start seeing some major numbers. So yeah, again, definitely a really good constellation, but if you're low on resources, definitely not necessary, and you might be better off just saving up for other characters down the line. And that brings us to Constellation 5, the Merciful. We're going to go over this one quickly because all it does is increase your talent level for Trail of Quilin by 3 levels. And this is really good, however, similarly to her third constellation, it's not going to be the biggest boost to her DPS, it's just going to be additive again. It's just going to be something that does increase your damage, but it's not really going to change the playstyle or how you use Ganyu in battle. It essentially will just increase the damage when you cast the skill and when it blows up, and it'll also attract enemies to it for a longer period of time because it'll take more damage and will break less easily. Alright, now let's check it out in battle. So you'll see that we're doing, without a crit, 4,285 damage, and with a crit we're doing right around 13,000 damage. So essentially, from the increase from talent level 8 to 11, we're doing an additional 2,000 to 3,000 damage. Now again, we're going to string them all together and see how quickly we can take down the boss. And like I said, this is a damage increase, but it's not so significant that you'd have to go out of your way for it. This is definitely one that I wouldn't go past 4 just to get 5. If I was going past 4, you want to go for 6. And like I said, that's even more of an investment and may not be worth it to you. However, if you have come this far, I do have to say, C6 is a doozy, and honestly completely changes how Ganyu's played. Alright, and that brings us to Constellation 6, the Clement. And honestly, like I said, this one is a little bit game-breaking. So essentially, after using your skill, this causes your next Frostflake arrow within 30 seconds to not require charging. Alright, and we'll go ahead and use a skill, and now you can see that there is a glowing light on her left arm indicating that a Frostflake arrow is now fully charged and ready to go. So now the next time that you want to use a Frostflake arrow, you can just go ahead and aim and shoot. You do have to make sure that your aim, it will not automatically target on, but this still will increase your damage considerably because you no longer have to wait to make sure that your Frostflake arrow is fully charged. Alright, now let's go ahead and take down the Pyroregicine. So we're going to use the burst, and then start wailing damage. And it's over. Honestly, it's a little ridiculous just how quickly she's able to damage her enemies and take them down. This was the biggest spike by far in terms of overall DPS, because all of a sudden you can just use your Frostflake arrows twice as fast. I have to admit, this is a very good Constellation and it synergizes very well with the rest of her kit. I do think that it is an excellent addition to her DPS. However, is it worth spending all your resources or money in order to make sure that you do get this? Not necessarily. Do I regret doing it? No, because Ganyu is one of my favorite characters and I really enjoy playing her. However, I don't think that I would do this for most characters, and I don't think that necessarily you need to do this for Ganyu, because like I've mentioned about 5 times by now, she's really good at C0. She does a lot of damage at C0, so all of this extra stuff is just extra stuff. In fact, I think that I'm going to be slowing down considerably after Ganyu, especially since I do really like Xiao, and I do think Hu Tao is going to be great. But I'm not as invested in them as characters as I was with, say, Zhongli and Ganyu, so I'll probably be keeping them closer to C0 or C1, unless if something changes and I just really love them, or I start making enough money off of YouTube in order to C6 multiple characters. I actually found this really fun, and I do really like seeing just how far a character can go when they're pushed to their limits and have everything in their arsenal ready to go. But at the end of the day, this is a gacha game, and it does cost money if you want to actually be able to do these things. So for the grand majority of players, and actually including myself, it's just not feasible to do this all the time, or even with one character. Most people can't even do it with any character in the game. And I do find that really unfortunate. I am actually kind of upset that these abilities are not built into their base kit, or could be unlocked with some kind of special event. It sucks that you have to summon multiple times in order to unlock a character's true potential, and it's something that I really wish would change, but I know it won't considering how much money it's making miHoYo at the end of the day. So with that, I think that if you really like a character and you really enjoy playing them, and you have the resources, I think it's totally fine to go for Constellations. But they're definitely not necessary to defeat anything in the game. Like, you do not need it in order to beat this game. And it should really just be reserved for characters that you really like. But I think at the end of the day, especially for free-to-play players, this isn't feasible, and you should honestly just save a lot of your resources for future banners so that you can have multiple 5 stars on your account. I think that's going to be a lot more valuable than having one character completely stacked, since this game does revolve around multiple enemies and multiple types, and not every 5-star character is going to be able to handle every single enemy or content in the game. So it just makes a lot more sense to be a little more balanced and get multiple characters that you like in different elements so that you can tackle any content that is thrown at you. Alright guys, and with that, I am going to let the video play out. I will be going through multiple bosses fighting just with Ganyu at C6 so that you can see her full damage potential. If you couldn't already tell, this video took a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of investment, and although I am really happy with it, I would greatly appreciate a subscribe, a like, and a comment down below. You guys don't understand just how much that means and how much it helps my channel grow. We're currently a pretty small channel. We're sitting at around 600 strong, so glad we made it to that milestone, and hopefully we can make it to 1,000 soon. If we can end up getting this channel monetized, then I'll be able to make a lot more Genshin Impact content for you all, and I would really enjoy that. Alright guys, that's all for now. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope that you guys are having fun playing Genshin Impact. Alright, till next time. Best wishes. Bye.
せっかくのチャンスだ。本気を出して俺を楽しませてくれ。投稿も一つの選択だよ。俺は敗者に優しいからね。
この仕事は排除するべきですね。そう関係者。
これを試してみようか。俺相手によくここまで持つな。
次の仕事、そう関係者。
無駄だ。せい。狂乱のごとく。
おさわり禁止。次の仕事は。次の仕事は。
はっ。はっ。
そう関係者。元王帝君のために。部外者禁止。
君の感じだ。